From the Stone Age to the Middle Ages to the Industrial Revolution to now the present day, humans have been around for quite a long time now. And in this time, we've undoubtedly made countless incredible achievements, from basic Stone Age tools to computers, iPhones, the internet, and now artificial intelligence. But this is only half of the story. You see, on the other side of the equation, we've caused arguably just as much pain, wars, disease, and suffering along the way. We've made a ton of mistakes. Now, listen up, pop quiz time. Off the top of your head, what do you think is the biggest mistake in the roughly 10,000 years of recorded human history? The collapse of the Roman Empire? World War II? The existence of baby boomers?
Oh, come on. The answer has to be the last one, right?
Unfortunately, no. As much as I wish I could say that was the case, Chris, we have to be honest and objective here.
Come on, just tell us the answer then. This buildup is already dragging on way too long.
Fair enough. The worst mistake we've ever made in human history is actually none of the above. The worst mistake we've ever made is farming. Huh? Yes, you heard that right. Farming. Sounds confusing, I know, but it turns out there is some very fascinating science behind this. Jared Mason Diamond is one of the absolute goats of science. He's written hundreds of popular scientific books and articles. He has a BA from Harvard and a PhD from Cambridge. His achievements in science and writing have awarded him a Pulitzer Prize and a National Medal of Science. He has countless more achievements you can look up on his Wikipedia page if you're curious. I'm going to stop here though, so that this video doesn't become literally 6 hours long. But you get the point. This is a very serious and well-respected scientist we're dealing with here. We'll get back to our GigaChad scientist in a second. But first, let's answer a question you probably have on your mind right now. What does this have to do with me as a modern-day Gen Z or millennial? And the answer is, well, quite literally, everything. You see, a big reason a lot of us don't fight harder for change is because we're often being told that, hey, we should be grateful for all our problems with not being able to get jobs, not being able to afford anything. This is still the best time to be alive, right? Life has never been this easy. We've been spoon-fed this narrative for so long, we kind of just accept it without questioning it at this point. However, as you'll soon see, real scientists who get paid good money to thoroughly study and write books about this would strongly disagree. In 1987, Jared Diamond wrote an article in Discover magazine titled "The Worst Mistake in the History of the Human Race," where he makes a compelling and serious argument that farming and the subsequent overpopulation that occurred as a result of it was, well, the name of the article. When you imagine the life of a caveman, an early hunter-gatherer tribe in your head, it's not a very pretty picture. Running long distances to hunt for food, failing means starvation, being eaten alive by predators, and of course the constant threat of another tribe brutally bludgeoning your head in with a club and stealing all your women. Wait, what if I told you that the actual science says that literally all of that is a complete and total myth? Not some of it, literally all of it. Let's break it down. Let's kick things off with the issue of war and violence. In a previous video, I made the argument that Gen Z is morally and scientifically correct for not wanting to work because there are objectively free things in nature. The Tacopia tribe to this day have enough coconuts and tubers growing on their island that they only have to work about 2 to 3 hours per day to collect them. And a common rebuttal that I always see on these videos is, it's not as great as you think. What if another tribe comes along, beats your head in, and takes all your women? Now, to be fair, I wouldn't blame you for thinking this. I kind of thought this myself before I researched this video. But it turns out, the idea that these tribes were constantly at war is mostly a modern myth where we retroactively project our own modern-era violent tendencies backwards onto the caveman. But even with a slight bit of common sense and critical thinking, this narrative is easily debunked. For starters, the much smaller population back then meant that, just from a pure probability standpoint, war and violence was bound to happen much, much less. Tribes typically consisted of no more than 100 people, yet the earth was still the same size as it is now. This meant that they were scattered over extremely vast distances, and thus the odds of a random chance encounter with another tribe was extremely low to begin with, and even if it did happen, it was highly unlikely to actually lead to war. It's kind of hard to start a war when you only see them once every few years. Also, since tribes were so small, even losing 2 or 3 members back then could end up being a huge deal. Everyone was far less disposable back then. Let's say, for example, you lose 2 or 3 members who happen to be your very best hunters. See, since everyone was far less disposable, this meant that you had to be way more careful and calculated before you decided to start a war. And to top it all off, hunter-gatherers didn't accumulate, store, or hoard resources like food, water, or money. The whole point of a war is to take over someone else's territory and acquire resources. Why even bother doing that if there are no resources to be acquired in the first place? Now, this isn't just my personal opinion on the matter. The actual scientific research done pretty much reflects exactly what you deduce from common sense. An article from science.org writes that early and mid-20th century studies of ancient people seem to confirm more of a Rousseauian view in which scattered populations, minimal technology, and ample game limited human violent conflict in the distant past. Cave paintings in Europe from about 40,000 to 10,000 years ago portray hunting of animals, but not human-on-human conflict. Archaeologists found little evidence of murder and organized violence before military empires of the Near East sprang up 4,000 years ago. Studies of living hunter-gatherer tribes in the first half of the 20th century appeared to show low rates of violence. American anthropologist Margaret Mead concluded in 1935 that the Arapish tribe of New Guinea, both men and women, are naturally maternal, gentle, responsive, and unaggressive. And initial primate research found fewer violent tendencies in humanity's nearest cousins. It wasn't until after the advent of agriculture and the subsequent overpopulation that came along with it, this is when violence, bloodshed, and war truly began to skyrocket. Estimates of the total percentage of population that died from war-related deaths went from less than 1% in the Paleolithic era to a staggering 10% in the early days of agrarian societies. Farm work meant you had to have more kids to help you out on the farm, which in turn meant more mouths to feed, which in turn meant more resources to stockpile, hoard, and fight over. Now, what about disease? You've heard me say this before. A medieval peasant had anywhere between 100 to 150 holidays per year, while you get lectured by corporate America that you're lazy for wanting more than 2 weeks off. And their narcissistic gaslighting responses usually, but you could easily die of an infection from a simple cut on your finger back then. They had plagues and diseases, so you should be so grateful for the shitty modern society we live in. So, are they right? Should we be grateful to modern society for eradicating all these diseases? Well, this depends on your perspective. Let's say someone randomly approaches you on the street, punches you in the face for no reason at all, then offers to pay for your medical bills afterwards. Should you be grateful that they're offering to pay your medical bills? Well, not really, right? I mean, they caused the problem in the first place, so logically they should fix it. Well, that's exactly what modern society is doing to gaslight you right now. The medieval times were indeed rife with disease, but that's because after the mistake of agriculture, society made the dumbass choice to skyrocket the population, shove a bunch of people and domesticated animals into small cities with poor spacing, and thus this created the perfect petri dish conditions for bacteria and viruses to grow, evolve, and absolutely wreak havoc. This is what paved the way for smallpox, the plague, and more recently, COVID to run absolutely rampant. So, what was life like before this? Before society made the dumbass decision to skyrocket the population to absolutely unsustainable levels? Well, early hunter-gatherers lived in tribes of 20 to 50 people in vast open-air spaces. The sheer extra space made it a far less ideal environment for disease to spread. They had basic knowledge of how to treat wounds such as honey and plant saps. This isn't to say diseases didn't exist back then, they certainly did, but they were far, far less common. And I could go on and on with the scientific evidence. The average height of a hunter-gatherer was 5'9" for men and 5'5" for women, compared to early farmers who stood at 5'4" and 5 foot respectively. This suggests they ate more and had much better nutrition despite not growing their own food. They only had to work about 15 to 20 hours per week to cover all their basic living needs. Meanwhile, with these insane rent prices, we're stuck here having to work 60 hours a week just to afford a shitty apartment with 5 roommates. By now, you're probably noticing the pattern and why so many experts consider this the worst mistake in all of human history, because this is the root cause, the genesis of every other mistake. Wars, disease, famines, plagues. They didn't happen in a vacuum. They all happened because somewhere some idiot decided that we all needed to have more kids. Hey guys, so I'm on a mission and I need your help. You see, I've made it the purpose of this channel to defend Gen Z from all these nasty, delusional Gen Z haters, and I've just realized we're starting to get close to taking down the most despicable one yet, the angry guy. This guy is not just another delusional old fart calling Gen Z lazy. He's literally had videos where he openly celebrates Gen Z suffering and even dying. He's just straight up a terrible human being. Now, thankfully, his channel is rapidly dying and we are rapidly gaining ground on him as we speak. So, if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us take down the biggest Gen Z hater out there. The current goal is to surpass him in subscribers by the end of summer. With your help, we can absolutely do this. Now, before we move on to the next chapter, I want to quickly clarify one thing to ensure I'm presenting this information accurately. Jared Diamond himself never wrote or claimed that overpopulation itself was the worst mistake in all of human history. His argument was mostly about farming. It is my personal opinion that the subsequent overpopulation that happened as a result is what ultimately caused most of the disease, war, and suffering in human history. Just wanted to quickly make that distinction clear. Part 2, how Gen Z is fixing this mistake. So you probably already know where this is going. It's no secret by now that Gen Z does not want to have kids, and the establishment media are totally freaking out over this. Big surprise, the wolves are mad that the sheep aren't breeding. And you've all by now heard all the fear-mongering, sensationalist headlines about how horrible this is going to be. Lack of workers, demographic time bomb, total societal collapse. But is any of this actually true? The birth rate crisis isn't super new anymore. We've been hearing about this for almost 10 years now. If it were as catastrophic as they're claiming, we'd definitely see some signs by now. Let's start with the issue of the lack of new workers. Now, you don't need a peer-reviewed study or an investigative news report to tell you that this is totally overblown. There have been other times in history where the population steeply declined, albeit under different circumstances. In the 14th century, Europe was recovering from the devastation of the Black Plague, having lost over a third of its total population at the time. Something really interesting, however, happened with the labor market back then. Having less people meant a shortage of workers, and that meant employers were desperate for labor, and thus there was a brief golden age where workers had unprecedented bargaining power to negotiate for better wages. Now, if you're a Gen Z or millennial living through this job market, you obviously know that this isn't the case today. But why? What's the difference this time around? Well, the main reason is because millions of jobs are being replaced by AI and automation. If the population collapse and lack of workers was really as big of an issue as they're claiming, they'd be knocking on your doors, begging you to take jobs, and offering you very good wages. Obviously, this isn't happening today. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Recent reports have come out showing that the AI revolution isn't just hype anymore, it's reality. It's already replaced 14% of jobs, and as a result, college graduates are entering the toughest job market ever. Some people who are really obsessed with forcing everyone to work have been coping by saying, well, AI is just going to replace jobs, but it will also create new ones. But this is just pure speculation, and we've seen absolutely no evidence that it's created anywhere near as many jobs as it's replaced. And this is just further proof of why it's so problematic that we have all these old and out-of-touch delusional boomers running the country. While they repeatedly hit the panic button about low birth rates, they completely ignore the existing problem we already have of AI rapidly replacing jobs as we speak. Now, ironically, these two apocalyptic crises have an interesting way of canceling each other out. there's not going to be a dramatic shortage of workers because AI is already replacing those jobs. So far, we've yet to see any of the negative doomsday predictions of worker shortages come to fruition. But what about the other side of the coin? Have there been any positive real-life impacts due to the current population decline? Well, you know how it's literally impossible for us Gen Z and millennials to even dream of owning a house these days? That's starting to change in places where the birth rate is dropping. Japan has long been the poster child for the birth rate crisis. Empty hospitals, daycares going out of business. This is all you hear about from the media. But I bet you didn't hear about the fact that in many rural and suburban areas, property prices have dramatically decreased. In some cases, you can get houses for extremely cheap or even for free through what's known as IKEA banks. Government listings of abandoned buildings, a lot of which don't actually look that bad. If we simply hold the line and keep this up, we could easily see a world in which in 5, 10, maybe 20 years, AI takes over most jobs, which will give us universal basic income and free us from the shackles of work. The few jobs that do remain will pay really well, as workers will once again have bargaining power. And just like in Japan, houses once again become affordable and we can finally dream of home ownership again. In a world in which delusional older generations are constantly blaming and shaming Gen Z for not wanting to work, not getting married, not having kids, and rejecting outdated traditional values, maybe we've got it all backwards. Maybe all these traditional values were never a good thing in the first place. Maybe they were, in fact, the biggest mistake in all of human history. And maybe after 10,000 years of wars, disease, famines, and endless suffering, Gen Z is finally erasing this mistake. Now, beyond just the biggest mistake in human history that Gen Z is erasing, it's also a historical fact that Gen Z literally works more than anyone in human history. We explore this more in this video right here. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.